Sometimes what we think of as our greatest shame becomes our most beautiful redemption. Under the merciless sun of Fort Laramie, where even the stones seem to choke from the heat, Charlotte Whitmore would discover that abandonment can be the beginning of a rebirth. The noon sun hammered Fort Laramie with a brutality that made the air shimmer above the cracked earth. In this furnace, Charlotte Whitmore stood straight, despite the stares that cut through her like red-hot blades. Her blue cotton dress, too tight at the shoulders, clung to her sweaty skin, but that was nothing compared to the humiliation burning in her chest. Colonel Elias Whitmore, her father, looked at her with that mixture of disgust and coldness she knew so well. His steel-gray eyes betrayed no paternal emotion, only the impatience of a businessman closing an unpleasant deal. "Here's my daughter," he declared in a dry voice to the Comanche warrior standing across from them. As agreed. Charlotte felt her legs trembling. Around her, soldiers and civilians watched the scene with a mix of morbid curiosity and disapproval. A few women whispered behind their fans, their voices carried by the hot wind that lifted the red dust. Tahu, the Comanche warrior, said nothing. He was taller than Charlotte had imagined, his copper skin marked by sun and hardship. His black hair was braided with feathers that danced in the scorching breeze. But what struck Charlotte was his gaze, calm, observant, lacking the cruelty she'd expected to find there. "You understand the terms clearly," the colonel continued, wiping sweat from his forehead with an already soaked handkerchief. "She belongs to you now. In exchange, you'll respect the new territorial boundaries." Charlotte closed her eyes, feeling the desert heat wrap around her like a shroud. In that moment, she no longer felt like a person, but like merchandise being traded, a burden being disposed of. Her father's words still echoed. "You'll never find a husband looking like that. You're dead weight to our family." When she reopened her eyes, Tahu was approaching slowly. He didn't grab her roughly as she'd expected. Instead, he inclined his head slightly, a gesture that seemed almost respectful. The desert wind blew stronger now, raising whirlwinds of sand that stung the eyes. In this storm of dust and humiliation, Charlotte Whitmore took a step toward her unknown destiny, not knowing she had just taken the first step toward her true freedom. The first steps into the desert were the hardest of Charlotte's life. Every grain of sand that worked its way into her boots seemed to remind her that she was moving away forever from the world she knew. The merciless sun transformed the horizon into a shimmering line where sky and earth merged in a heat haze. Tahu walked ahead of her, guiding his horse with steady steps. He hadn't forced her to mount, hadn't tied her up, hadn't even spoken to her. This absence of violence unsettled her more than anything. She'd prepared herself for brutality, chains, screaming. But this respectful silence was more troubling than all the punishments she'd imagined. The hot wind lifted her skirt with every gust, and Charlotte struggled to maintain a dignity that was slipping away. Her chestnut hair, usually properly styled in a bun, escaped its pins and stuck to her neck in damp strands. She felt sweat running between her shoulder blades, staining her dress with dark circles. After 2 hours of walking, when her legs began to wobble, Tahu stopped near a rock that offered meager shade. Without a word, he dismounted and pulled a leather water pouch from his saddlebags. Charlotte watched him approach, her heart pounding. He offered her the water with a simple, natural gesture. "Drink," he said in heavily accented but perfectly understandable English. Charlotte hesitated. In the stories she'd heard, Comanches were bloodthirsty savages who tortured their prisoners. But this man with dark eyes was offering her water under a blazing sun. Her trembling hands took the pouch, and the cool water flowed down her throat like a blessing. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice hoarse from thirst and emotion. Tahu nodded and sat on his heels watching the horizon. Charlotte then noticed the details she'd missed in her fear. The fine scars on his arms that told stories of hunting and survival, the way his fingers unconsciously caressed a red feather attached to his belt, the respect with which he looked at the desert stretching before them. "How long?" she dared to ask. "3 sons," he replied, raising 3 fingers. Then, after a pause, "Your name?" "Charlotte. Charlotte Whitmore." He repeated it slowly, his tongue rolling over the foreign syllables. "Charlotta." For the first time in hours, Charlotte felt something that resembled curiosity rather than terror. This man wasn't the monster her father and the soldiers had painted him to be. He was human, more human perhaps than many of those she'd left behind. The wind still blew, now lifting spirals of golden dust that danced around them like desert spirits. Night in the desert brought a cold that surprised Charlotte. After the day's furnace, she hadn't imagined she could shiver under the stars. Tahu had lit a small fire with dry branches, and the flames danced in the darkness like giant fireflies. Charlotte sat a few yards away, wrapped in a rough blanket Tahu had given her without her daring to ask. She watched this man who, a few hours earlier, had seemed so terrifying. He was preparing a mixture of dried meat and berries in a small metal container, his movements precise and economical. The night wind whispered between the rocks, carrying unknown fragrances, wild sage, sun-warmed earth, and something more subtle she couldn't identify. It wasn't the smell of her cozy room at Fort Laramie, with its lace curtains and lavender scent. "Are you hungry?" asked Tahu, offering her the container. Charlotte hesitated. The food looked strange, nothing like the delicate stews their cook prepared, but her stomach was crying out from hunger, and the smell, though unusual, was appetizing. "What is it?" "Pemmican. Buffalo meat, berries, fat, strength for long journey." She tasted it cautiously. The flavor was rich, salty, with a surprising sweetness from the berries. It was nourishing in a way the refined, small portions of her old world never were. "It's good," she admitted, surprised. Tahu smiled for the first time, and Charlotte realized this smile completely transformed his face. He looked younger, less intimidating. In the firelight, she noticed his eyes weren't black as she'd thought, but a deep brown that reflected the flames. "My people say food shared, hearts united." He paused, searching for words in English. "You, not prisoner. You, guest." These words hit Charlotte like a revelation. Guest. Not prisoner, not burden, not bargaining chip. Guest. When was the last time someone had made her feel welcome somewhere? She thought of her father, his cold stares, his cutting comments about her appearance, her inability to find a husband, her supposed uselessness. "You're a burden, Charlotte. Nobody will ever want you." "Why?" she asked suddenly, her voice broken with emotion. "Why be kind to me? My father told you what he thought of me." Tahu looked at her for a long time, the flames dancing between them. The wind blew stronger now, making the fire flicker and carrying his words into the night. "Your father sees with blind eyes. I see brave woman who walks in desert without crying. I see strength in your straight back, beauty in your sad eyes. Blind father doesn't make worthless daughter." Charlotte felt tears rising, but for the first time in years, they were tears of something that felt like hope. The third day of travel revealed to Charlotte a landscape she never could have imagined. The arid lands gave way to a green valley where a clear river flowed. White teepees dotted the bank like giant flowers, and smoke from several fires rose lazily in the morning air. The Comanche village was awakening. Women drew water in leather containers. Children ran between the dwellings laughing. Men prepared their horses. Charlotte felt her heart tighten with apprehension. All eyes turned to them as they approached. "Don't be afraid," Tahu murmured. "My grandmother is waiting for you." Charlotte dismounted from the horse Tahu had finally offered her the night before, her legs trembling after 3 days of travel. Her dress was now stained with dust and sweat, her hair tangled by the desert wind that hadn't stopped blowing. She must have looked pitiful. An elderly woman approached them, her gray hair braided with blue beads, her face weathered by the sun but her eyes sparkling with wisdom. She wore a buckskin dress decorated with intricate patterns, and her steps were surprisingly firm despite her advanced age. "Sania," Tahu said with deference, bowing slightly. The elder looked Charlotte up and down, her piercing eyes seeming to see beyond appearances. She approached and, to Charlotte's surprise, placed her weathered hands on her cheeks. Her palms were warm and rough, but with a maternal gentleness Charlotte hadn't known since her mother's death. "Welcome, daughter with sad eyes," Sania said in hesitant but melodious English. "You have traveled far from your heart. Here, you can breathe." Charlotte felt her defenses crumble. This woman, this stranger, offered her more warmth in a few words than her father had in 23 years. Tears rolled down her cheeks and Sania gently wiped them away with her thumb. "Tears cleanse the soul," the elder murmured. Cry if you need to. Then we'll learn to smile. Around them, curiosity was palpable. Some faces showed mistrust, others compassion. Children hid behind their mothers to better observe this white woman in strange clothes. Charlotte felt like a circus animal, exposed and vulnerable. But Sanya took her arm with authority and guided her toward a teepee larger than the others, decorated with symbols painted in red and blue. The wind made the stretched skins flap gently, creating a soothing melody. "You'll sleep here," the elder said, lifting the entrance flap. "With me. Tahu lives there." She pointed to a neighboring teepee. "He watches over you, but respects your space. It's our way." The interior was surprisingly comfortable. Furs covered the ground. Woven baskets contained various provisions, and in the center a small hearth waited to be lit. Everything was orderly, functional, but with a simple beauty that touched Charlotte. "Rest now," Sanya said. "Tomorrow we begin." "Begin what?" Charlotte asked. The elder smiled, her wrinkles deepening. "Your new life, dear child. Your real life." The first weeks in the village were a mix of humiliations and small victories. Charlotte stumbled constantly, spilled the water she tried to carry, and her delicate hands covered with blisters from trying to weave baskets like the other women. The perpetual desert wind seemed to mock her clumsy efforts, lifting her loose hair and scattering the twigs she tried to assemble. Every gust reminded her she was a stranger in this world where everything seemed natural to others. "Slower," Sanya advised patiently, her expert hands guiding Charlotte's. Fingers must listen to the material, not force it. But Charlotte grew impatient. She wanted to prove she could belong to this place, that she wasn't the burden her father had described. This urgency made her awkward, nervous. When she dropped a clay pot that shattered on the stones, she burst into tears, frustrated by her own incompetence. "Look at me," Sanya said gently, kneeling to gather the pieces. "You see failure. I see clay returning to earth to nourish new pots. Nothing is lost. Everything transforms." Language lessons came more easily. Charlotte had always had a musical ear, and she began to grasp the melodious nuances of Comanche. Words flowed like river water, carrying concepts that didn't exist in her native tongue. "Sakari," Sanya told her one day, watching her distribute food to village children with a natural smile. "It means the sweet one. That's your name now." Charlotte, Sakari, felt something warm in her chest. A new name, an identity untainted by judgments from her past. When children began calling her by this name, running to her laughing, she understood she was being born a second time. Tahu often watched her from afar, respectful, but attentive. He never approached without reason, but when she needed help carrying something heavy or got lost going for water, he appeared silently to help. One evening, as she struggled to light the fire in Sanya's teepee, she heard him tell his grandmother, "She learns quickly. Her heart is good." "Yes," the elder replied, "but she still carries the chains of her old world. It takes time for the soul to free itself." Sakari pretended to sleep, but Sanya's words echoed in her mind. Chains. Yes, she could still feel them. In her hesitant gestures, in her constant fear of disappointing, in that inner voice that repeated her father's harsh criticisms. That night, the wind blew stronger than usual, making the teepee skins groan. But for the first time, Sakari didn't hear it as mockery. She listened to it like a lullaby, a promise that change was possible, that even storms eventually calm. Summer was blooming in the valley when Sakari finally began to find her place. Her hands, now calloused but skilled, wove baskets with new grace. Her body, once considered ungainly by her father, revealed its natural strength in daily tasks. She carried water without spilling, lit fires on the first try, and her voice rang with confidence when she spoke Comanche with the children. The village's looks had changed. Where she once saw mistrust, she now found benevolent curiosity, sometimes even affection. Women included her in their conversations, elders nodded approvingly when she passed, and children fought to be by her side during collective tasks. But it was toward Tahu that her thoughts drifted most often. He'd become less distant, participating in evening gatherings around the fire, sometimes sharing his knowledge of medicinal plants or weather signs. Sakari discovered in him a quiet intelligence, a wisdom that had nothing to do with books from her old world, but drew from patient observation of nature. One evening, as the warm wind carried the fragrance of wildflowers, Tahu approached Sania's teepee with something in his hands. The elder was already sleeping, and Sakari sat outside, contemplating the stars scattered across the sky like brilliant grains of sand. "Sakari," he said softly, sitting beside her with careful respect. He held a flute carved from dark wood, decorated with delicate patterns that seemed to dance in the moonlight. Without a word, he brought it to his lips and began to play. The melody that rose was so purely beautiful that Sakari felt her heart clench. It was sad and joyful at once, like the song of wind in canyons, like the cry of birds at sunset. The music seemed to tell ancient stories, lost loves, found hopes. When the last note faded into the night, a deep silence settled between them. Sakari had tears in her eyes, moved by a beauty she'd never suspected. "That was magnificent," she murmured. "Where did you learn?" "My father," Tahu replied, caressing the flute tenderly. He said music speaks when words aren't enough. He looked at her then, and in his dark eyes Sakari saw something that made her tremble. Admiration, tenderness, perhaps even love. "You are beautiful, Sakari," he said simply. "Not how your old people count beauty. Beautiful like mountains are beautiful, like rivers are beautiful. Beautiful for your strength, for your kindness, for your courage." Sakari felt her breath catch. Never in all her life had a man told her she was beautiful. Her father had convinced her she was repulsive, that no man would ever want her. But here, under the desert stars, with the wind whispering in her hair, she felt for the first time desirable, precious. "Tahu," she began, but he gently placed a finger on her lips. "No words tonight," he said. "Just this." And he began to play again, the melody rising toward the stars like a prayer of love. The months following that magical night were the happiest of Sakari's life. Autumn painted the valley in flaming colors, and she discovered a unique place in the community. Women came to consult her for advice on medicinal herbs she'd learned at Fort Laramie, and she taught them sewing techniques she'd mastered in return. Tahu and she developed a silent understanding. He brought her wildflowers he found during hunts. She prepared his favorite dishes. In the evenings, they often sat side by side, and he played his flute while she listened, fascinated by melodies that seemed to express all the feelings they didn't yet dare name. But deep in her heart, fear was growing. Sakari felt too happy, as if this happiness was a gift she didn't deserve. Voices from the past still echoed. "You're just a burden, Charlotte. Nobody will ever really want you." One stormy night, when lightning streaked the sky and wind howled between teepees with unusual violence, this fear exploded into panic. Sakari woke with a start, heart pounding, overwhelmed by a terrible certainty. She didn't deserve this life. These people would never truly accept her, and one day they'd discover she was just the fraud her father had always said she was. Without thinking, blinded by terror and shame, she got up and began gathering her belongings. She had to leave, return to her world, before they rejected her like her father had. In her confusion, she spotted the magnificent chestnut horse near Tahu's teepee, a sacred animal she knew used for important ceremonies. But her reason was clouded by panic. She needed transportation to flee, and this horse was there, available. If this story of redemption and self-discovery touches you as much as it touches us to tell it, don't hesitate to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of these extraordinary tales of human transformation. Sakari's story is just beginning. The storm still rumbled when she silently led the horse out of the village. Wind whipped her face, mixing her tears with the rain that was starting to fall. Each step took her away from the only real family she'd ever known, but her fear was stronger than her reason. She didn't see Sania emerge from her teepee, alerted by a premonition. The elder watched the silhouette disappear into the storm and murmured a prayer to her ancestors. "Protect her, even from herself. Her path isn't finished." In the distance, a wolf howled, like an omen of loneliness. Sakari galloped toward a horizon she believed was her deliverance, not knowing she was running toward her greatest challenge. The violent wind seemed to scream at her to turn back, but she was already too far to hear her own wisdom. In the village she was abandoning, Tahu slept peacefully, his flute beside him, unaware that the woman he loved had just committed the mistake that would change everything. 3 days of frantic riding led Sakari to the gates of Millfield, a small settler town she'd spotted on a map in her father's office. Exhausted, starving, and eaten by guilt, she now looked at these white wooden houses with their well-tended gardens, wondering if she'd made the right decision. The sacred horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion with flowing mane, attracted all eyes. Sakari realized with horror the extent of her act. She had stolen a ceremonial animal, a being considered sacred by the people who had welcomed her. Shame washed over her like an icy wave. A farming family, the Hendersons, took her in out of Christian charity. Mrs. Henderson, a woman with gray hair pulled back in a strict bun, brought her into their modest parlor, shaking her head disapprovingly. "My God, what a state you're in. Where on earth did you come from? And that horse? It looks wild." Sakari invented a hesitant story about a bandit attack, carefully avoiding any mention of the Comanches. But the look she met in this house painfully reminded her of her old world. Polite smiles hiding judgments, whispers behind gloved hands, that cold politeness she'd almost forgotten. "You should fix yourself up a bit," Mrs. Henderson suggested, examining her embroidered buckskin clothes and hair braided with beads. "These ornaments hardly suit a respectable lady." The autumn wind blew through the lace curtains, bringing the smell of dry earth and dead leaves. Sakari felt like a caged animal, suffocated by these walls that enclosed her, nostalgic for the infinite space of the desert and the freedom she'd found there. The next day at the town market, she met the gaze of Mrs. Caldwell, the banker's wife, an elegant woman in a blue silk dress who looked her up and down with disgust. "My God, look at that," she murmured to her friends. "She looks like she came straight out of a savage camp. And that complexion? She's lived like a squaw." These words hit Sakari like slaps. Squaw. The contempt in that term revolted her, but also made her doubt. Was this really what she'd become? A degraded woman soiled by her life among the savages? Later that afternoon, as she tried to rest on the Hendersons' porch, Mrs. Caldwell approached with a false smile and pulled some coins from her purse. "Here, my poor girl," she said condescendingly. "Enough to buy decent clothes and maybe a train ticket to elsewhere. It's better you don't linger too long on our porch. It makes a bad impression on respectable folks." Sakari looked at the shining coins in the gloved hand, then raised her eyes to that powdered, haughty face. In that moment, she understood with painful clarity that this world she'd fled to find didn't want her either. She wasn't good enough for the Comanches in her own eyes, and not pure enough for whites in theirs. The wind blew stronger now, lifting dust from the street and making signs clatter. Sakari felt her heart break into 1,000 pieces, realizing she'd abandoned the only place where she'd ever been truly accepted. It was on the 5th day of her stay with the Hendersons that Sakari saw a familiar figure in Millfield's dusty street. Her heart stopped. Tahu was advancing with steady steps between the wooden houses, his dark eyes sweeping the surroundings with a hunter's patience. He had found her. But what broke Sakari's heart was seeing the state he was in. His face bore purple bruises, his lip was split, and he limped slightly. Traces of violence, of beatings. As an Indian in this white town, he must have endured hostility, perhaps even assaults from those who saw him as a threat. "Tahu!" She ran toward him, forgetting the scandalized looks of passers-by. He stopped seeing her, and the expression of relief that crossed his features was immediately replaced by something more painful. Disappointment, deep sadness. "Sakari," he said simply, his voice hoarser than usual. "You're hurt. What did they do to you?" She reached toward his bruised face, but he stepped back slightly. "It doesn't matter," he replied. "I came for Huyana." Huyana, the Comanche name of the sacred horse. Sakari felt shame engulf her like a sandstorm. Of course, he hadn't come for her. He'd come to retrieve the animal she'd stolen, the sacred animal she'd defiled with her impulsive act. The afternoon wind lifted dust around them, creating whirlwinds that seemed to dance between them like accusing spirits. Sakari noticed that the town's inhabitants were stopping to observe the scene, some with curiosity, others with poorly hidden hostility. "He's in the Henderson stable," she murmured. unable to raise her eyes to his. "Tahu, I'm sorry. I don't know what came over me. I was scared, confused." "Scared of what?" His voice was calm, but Sakari heard deep hurt in it. "Scared of us? Scared of me? Scared of not deserving?" She stopped, words choking in her throat. A group of men was approaching now, led by the deputy sheriff, a man with graying sideburns and a hard look. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, placing his hand on his weapon. "This redskin bothering you, miss?" "No," Sakari protested vehemently. "He's not harming me. He's just coming to get his horse." "His horse?" the sheriff sneered. "Indians don't have ownership papers. How do we know he didn't steal it?" Sakari saw Tahu's muscles tense, his dignity tested by these accusations. In his eyes, she read pain that went far beyond the blows he'd received. It was the pain of being considered less than human, exactly as she'd been considered less than worthy by her father. "The horse belongs to him," she said firmly, finally finding the courage to stand straight. "And I'm leaving with him." The sheriff raised his eyebrows, surprised. Tahu looked at her with an unreadable expression. "Are you sure?" he asked softly. "Do you really want to come back?" In the wind now blowing stronger, lifting Sakari's loose hair, she heard like an echo of Tahu's flute, of Sania's wisdom, of the children's laughter from the tribe. She understood then that she'd been home for a long time. All that remained was to return there. The return to the village was a silent ordeal. For 3 days, Tahu and Sakari traveled side by side without exchanging more than necessary words. The sacred horse Huyana trotted behind them, his chestnut coat gleaming in the sun, like a silent witness to the fault committed. Tahu still limped, and Sakari could see he was suffering, but each time she tried to inquire about his injuries, he changed the subject. The desert wind, which once brought her fragrances of freedom, now seemed to carry reproaches and regrets. "Why did you come looking for me?" she finally asked on the second evening as they camped near a water source. Tahu remained silent for a long time, stirring the fire with a stick. "Sania dreamed of you," he finally said. "She saw your spirit wandering in emptiness, lost between two worlds. She told me, like, go find her before she's lost forever. And you listened to her? Even after what I did?" He raised his eyes to her, and in his gaze she saw all the complexity of his feelings. Anger, disappointment, but also a tenderness that hadn't disappeared. "You took Huyana," he said. "That's serious, but you also took my heart long before that. A stolen heart, that's forgiven less easily than a horse." These words touched Sakari more deeply than any reproach. She understood she hadn't just betrayed the tribe's trust, she'd broken the heart of the man who loved her. On the 3rd day, when they spotted the teepees in the distance, Sakari felt her stomach knot. The village seemed peaceful under the afternoon sun, but she knew this tranquility was deceptive. Her return would create ripples, awaken anger. Their first steps into the village confirmed her fears. Conversation stopped abruptly, children ceased playing, and all eyes converged on them. But these looks were no longer curious or benevolent as at the time of her arrival. They were cold, mistrustful, sometimes frankly hostile. Okori, one of the most respected warriors, stepped toward them. His face was closed, his arms crossed over his chest. "You bring back the thief," he said to Tahu accusingly. "Why?" "She came back herself," Tahu replied calmly. "And she brings back Huyana, after defiling him with her flight." Okori's voice carried far, and other warriors gathered around them. "She dishonored the sacred animal, dishonored our hospitality. Some say she brings bad luck." Sakari lowered her head, overwhelmed by the weight of accusations. The wind blew stronger now, lifting dust and making teepee skins snap like whips. In this whirlwind, she felt more alone than ever. That's when a familiar voice rose. "Let her pass." Sania appeared, leaning on her walking stick, her gray hair floating in the wind. The elder approached slowly, and the crowd respectfully parted before her. "Grandmother," Okori began. "I said, let her pass," Sania repeated with authority that brooked no discussion. She stopped in front of Sakari and looked at her for a long time, her piercing eyes seeming to read her soul. "You came back," she said simply. "Good. Now we'll see if you learned something." She turned to the crowd. "This woman will sleep in my teepee." No one will disturb her tonight. Tomorrow, the elders will decide. The circle slowly dispersed, but Sakari still felt the weight of disapproving looks. She'd found her refuge, but she'd have to earn her place among them again. That night in Sania's tipi, Sakari couldn't sleep. The night wind made the stretched skins groan, and every whisper seemed to carry the voices of those condemning her. The elder slept peacefully on her fur bed, but Sakari stayed awake, staring into darkness and ruminating on her guilt. At dawn, Sania rose and began her daily preparations with the same serenity as usual. She offered Sakari a bowl of herbal tea, then sat across from her, her piercing eyes fixed on hers. "You're looking for something," she finally said. "Something you lost. But what you're looking for, you won't find it among the whites nor in fleeing from here." "What am I looking for?" Sakari asked, her voice broken with emotion. "Forgiveness, but not from others. Your own." The elder got up and went to a carved wooden chest she kept in a corner of the teepee. She pulled out an object wrapped in buckskin cloth, which she unfolded reverently. It was a book, old and worn, its pages yellowed by time. "What is it?" Sakari murmured, surprised to see such an object in this place. "Mary Running Bear's journal," Sania replied. "A white woman who lived among us 30 winters ago. She too fled, she too came back, and others before her." Sakari took the book with trembling hands and opened the first page. The writing was fine, delicate, and the words seemed to dance in the morning light filtering through the teepee skins. "Today, I committed the gravest mistake of my life. I stole White Cloud's ceremonial horse and fled east, convinced I didn't deserve the love they showed me here. Now, sitting in this prospector's cabin where they look at me like a disgusting curiosity, I understand I abandoned the only family that ever truly accepted me." Sakari's tears fell on the ancient pages. This woman, Mary, had lived exactly the same ordeal, the same fear, the same flight, the same heartbreak. "Did she come back?" Sakari asked in a strangled voice. "Yes, and she found her place. But first she had to learn to forgive herself." Sania gently stroked Sakari's hair. "You're not the first broken woman who finds refuge here, and you won't be the last. But each must make her own way to peace." A stronger gust made the teepee tremble, and in the distance Sakari heard the familiar sound of a flute. Tahu was playing somewhere in the village, that sad and beautiful melody she loved so much. But now she heard a new nuance in it, the melancholy of wounded love. "He plays for you," Sania said. "Even hurt, even disappointed, he plays for you. That's true love. It doesn't die with the first storm." That night, Sakari dreamed of her mother. She saw her in a landscape of golden mist, dressed in a white robe that floated in an invisible wind. Her mother approached and placed her hands on her daughter's cheeks. "You're not free yet, darling," she said with infinite tenderness. "But you can be. You just need to let go of what you're not to embrace what you truly are." Upon waking, Sakari knew what she had to do. Mary's journal had shown her the way. She had to submit to the tribe's judgment, accept the consequences of her actions, and earn her redemption, not for them but for herself. The morning wind blew gently now, carrying not reproaches, but a promise of purification. At sunrise, Sakari emerged from Sania's teepee and headed toward the village center, where the elders gathered for important decisions. The morning wind still carried the night's coolness, but she already felt the day's heat rising from the red earth. Warriors and women gathered in a circle, their faces grave in the dawn's golden light. Tahu was there too, standing apart, his flute in hand. Their eyes met for an instant, and Sakari read a sadness that gripped her heart. Nahale, the eldest chief, stepped forward. His white hair was decorated with eagle feathers, and his face lined by years carried the wisdom of many winters. He looked at Sakari for a long time before speaking. "You took Huyana, our sacred horse," he said, in a voice that carried far. "You betrayed our trust. Some think you bring misfortune. What do you say in your defense?" Sakari stepped forward to the circle's center, her heart pounding. She'd prepared excuses, explanations, but facing these faces waiting for her answer, she understood only truth would do. "I have no excuse," she said clearly. "I acted from fear and selfishness. I hurt people I love through lack of faith in myself." She paused, feeling the wind lift her hair. "But I didn't come here to ask your forgiveness. I came to ask for a chance to earn my place among you." A murmur ran through the assembly. It was unusual for an accused person not to beg forgiveness but instead ask to earn it. "And how do you think you'll earn this place?" Nahali asked. "By submitting to the purification ritual. By accepting to carry the shame of my act until my actions prove I'm worthy of trust." Sakari raised her head, looking at each face around her. "I ask for 12 sons of atonement. 12 sons to heal my own wounds and prove that Sakari can honor the name she was given." Sanya smiled discreetly. She recognized the wisdom she'd hoped to see born in this wounded woman. The elders withdrew to deliberate, and the village fell into tense silence. Sakari waited, sitting cross-legged at the circle's center, eyes closed, listening to the wind whispering in the tall grass. When they returned, Nahali carried a necklace of blue and white beads, symbol of the purification ritual. "We accept your request," he announced solemnly. 12 sons you'll spend caring for our horses, repairing the bond you broke with Huyana. You'll sleep alone, eat in silence, work without reward. At the end, if your heart is pure, if your actions have shown your sincerity, you'll be Komatsani, she who returned. He placed the necklace on Sakari's shoulders. The beads were cool against her skin, heavy with the weight of responsibility she accepted. As she rose to begin her atonement, she heard a familiar melody rise in the air. Tahu was playing his flute, a different melody this time, neither sad nor joyful, but full of hope. A melody that said, "I'm waiting for you." The wind carried this music to her like a blessing, and for the first time in weeks, Sakari smiled. The road would be long, but she'd take it with courage. She'd finally stopped running. The 12 days that followed were the most difficult and transformative of Sakari's life. Every morning before dawn, she went to the enclosures where the horses grazed, Huyana among them. The sacred animal looked at her with mistrust at first, his ears back, but gradually, over the days, he accepted her presence. The work was hard. Cleaning troughs, carrying hay, brushing tangled manes, treating small wounds. Her hands, already hardened by village life, covered with new blisters. But for the first time in her life, Sakari found a form of peace in this physical pain. The desert wind blew relentlessly during these autumn days, sometimes bringing sandstorms that forced her to protect the animals. In these moments, she thought of her father's words, "You'll always be a burden." But now, these words no longer had the power to wound her. She was here, useful, even necessary, protecting these magnificent creatures. On the 7th day, as she bandaged a wound on a young colt's flank, Huyana approached her for the first time. The great chestnut stallion placed his muzzle on her shoulder, a gesture of reconciliation that made her cry with gratitude. "He forgives you," said a voice behind her. It was Tahu, watching her from the enclosure entrance. "And you?" she asked without turning around, continuing to caress the sacred horse's neck. "I never had to forgive you, Sakari. I had to understand. And now, I understand." He approached and knelt beside her. For the first time since her return, he looked at her with tenderness, without that shadow of disappointment that had made her suffer so much. "You fled because you didn't believe you were worthy of being loved," he said softly. "But look around you. Look how the horses trust you now. Look how the children watch you with admiration when you pass. You can no longer pretend you have no value." On the 10th day, during a violent storm, Sakari kept vigil all night in the enclosure, calming horses frightened by thunder and lightning. The wind howled like a demon, but she held firm, singing lullabies Sania had taught her, her voice mixing with the storm's rumble. In the morning, when the village discovered she'd saved several colts that could have been injured in their panic, the last resistance fell. Even Okori, the warrior who'd welcomed her with such hostility, nodded with respect. The 12th day finally arrived. Sakari was exhausted, but serene. She'd found something she'd been seeking all her life without knowing it. Certainty of her own worth. Not what others gave her, but what she recognized in herself. That evening, sitting alone near the enclosure, she heard her mother's voice again in the wind's whisper. "You're free now, my daughter. Free to be who you truly are." And for the first time in her life, Sakari answered with confidence, "Yes, Mama, I'm free, and I'm home." The night wind carried her words toward the stars, like a prayer of gratitude to the infinite desert that had welcomed her broken and now returned her whole. The dawn of the 13th day rose with particular gentleness. The wind that had accompanied this entire ordeal now blew in light caresses, carrying the fragrance of wildflowers and the promise of a new beginning. The tribe gathered in a circle near the river, at the same place where Sakari had been judged 12 days earlier. But this time the faces no longer expressed mistrust or anger. There was curiosity, respect, and in some looks, sincere admiration. Nahal stepped forward, carrying in his hands a necklace different from the purification ritual one. This one was composed of polished blue stones, each engraved with ancient symbols that told the story of redemption and return to the sacred circle. "Sakari," he said in a solemn voice that carried far in the morning air, "you asked for 12 sons to prove your worth. The spirits observed your actions. They saw your hands heal what they had wounded, your heart serve where it had betrayed." He stopped before her, and Sakari felt her heart beat like a ceremony drum. "Today we give you a new name. No longer Sakari the Sweet One, but Comanche, she who returned. For you returned not only to us, but to yourself." With trembling hands, Nahali placed the necklace of blue stones around Sakari's neck. The bead's weight was different from the rituals. Light, liberating, like a burden transforming into wings. Then rose the women's song, an ancient melody that spoke of rebirth, eternal cycles, the soul finally finding its promised land. Their voices mingled with the wind's whisper and the river's babble, creating a symphony of welcome that made Comanche cry with happiness. In the crowd, she spotted Tahu approaching slowly. He held his flute in his hands, that flute that had accompanied their budding love, their separation, and now, their reunion. Without a word, he offered it to her. "For me?" she murmured, incredulous. "It belonged to my father, then to me. Now it belongs to us. Like our hearts, like our lives." He smiled, and in that smile she read all the love she'd thought lost. "If you'll have me, if you'll have us." Comanche took the flute reverently. This instrument that had sung their love would now be the symbol of their rediscovered union, purified by the ordeal and grown through forgiveness. Has this transformation story touched you? If you've lived this redemption journey with Comanche, don't hesitate to subscribe to our channel to discover other extraordinary tales of human rebirth. Like this video if it resonated in your heart, and tell us in the comments where you're listening to this story from. We love knowing our tales travel everywhere in the world, carried by the wind of shared emotion. 30 years later, gray-haired and face weathered by the desert sun, Comanche sat by the river with Tahu. Their intertwined hands bore the marks of time and work, but their hearts had remained young. Around them ran children with crystalline laughter, their children and their children's children, a lineage of love that perpetuated itself. "Have you ever regretted it?" Tahu asked, looking at this life they'd built together. Comanche smiled, her eyes shining with that deep peace only true freedom can give. She raised the flute she always kept near her and played a few notes. That melody they loved so much, and that told their story. When the music faded, carried by the desert's eternal wind toward the infinite horizon, she answered in a soft but firm voice, "Regret? No, my love. It was never a punishment. It was my liberation." The wind blew stronger, lifting her gray hair like an ultimate caress, and in its whisper, one could have heard the echo of all lost souls who finally find their way home.